Vaush, you believe that the source of human wealth is primarily labor, and Stefan, you believe it's primarily innovation. Is that correct?
No, I believe that the source of human wealth is property rights, self-ownership, and a freedom from violence. And I think Bosch's argument is something like a mysterious ahistorical asteroid hit the Earth and we got wealth. I may
Wait.
be paraphrasing a little bit.
Very
like
slightly, Stefan. Clean your ears out, my friend. I've said pretty clearly wealth is created by labor. Whether that labor be the factory worker or the inventor that produces the machine the worker is on, this has been the case in every society throughout human history. After all, inventors are themselves laborers. But yeah, no, there's just no, there's absolutely no deterministic social or historical force that means that property rights and prevention of violence leads to the material wealth of our society. Singapore, South Korea under its fascist regime, the Soviet Union back when it was around, China today, Saudi Arabia. These are societies that have enjoyed massive economic and productive booms with, let's say, tenuous relationships to the principles of free markets and, human rights.
okay, that's great. Let's deal with those.
I agree. It
countries.
is great. Nuance is very special.
That's a great argument. Now we have something we can discuss. Okay, so South Korea. If you compare and contrast South Korea, which is a relatively free market system, at least compared to North Korea, and you see that South Korea's wealth is 20 to 30 times per capita North Korea's wealth, well, we can see the effects of relative free markets to a communist system. Of course, remember, North Korea, not referred to these days, of course, was founded specifically as a communist system. And so if you look at the difference between South and North Korea, you have here a twins study, the most robust form of comparing situations and environments known to mankind, because you have a genetically virtually identical population. You have one system that's relative free market, relative property rights, relative rule of law, relative contract enforcement. You have another system that's communist, and you can see the outcome. With regards to Saudi Arabia is wealthy as an effect of the wealth of the West, because Saudi Arabia stole the oil producing companies, the oil producing machinery, and the oil producing technology from the West. And so, boy, yeah, it's but it's like calling a thief wealthy because he's stealing from people. That's not really the same as actually having a free market yourself. And the wealth that Saudi Arabia is able to gather, it gathers because the wealth of the West is enough to purchase stuff that the Arabs, to a large degree, not completely, stole from the West. So I don't think that this really goes against the argument.
Which example of yours would you like?
Forward.
Which examples of yours would you like demolished first? Would you prefer North and South Korea or Saudi Arabia?
I feel that that's a bit of a rhetorical question.
It is. I'll do both. So, South Korea had heavily protectionist policies up until the 1980s. The idea that the free market was what led to their sudden economic boom following the Korean War is ludicrous. What's more, they had a fascist government for a large portion of that time, US-backed, installed as an alternative to what happened in North Korea. The circumstances that have befallen North Korea are incredibly complicated, but the idea that the differential between North and South Korea's relative levels of success is that one of them has had free markets and one of them hasn't is ridiculous. There is such an enormous multiplexity of issues, historical, social, economic, that divide these two countries and have continued to divide these two countries for the past 70 years, which makes comparisons between the two of them on such a singular, simple basis.
Do you have any actual arguments, or do you just say ridiculous and it's complex?
Responding to an argument with, is that an argument rhetorically, is not the same as rebutting my argument. I'll ask you, let me finish. That's with the case of North and South Korea. With Saudi Arabia, I don't know what you mean by they stole their wealth. They traded for it in the free market. They were able to leverage.
No. They nationalized Western countries. They nationalized Western technology and Western companies and Western capital equipment after the Second World War.
So they were able to, not using the free market, develop a tremendous amount of civilizational wealth that currently places them, in relative levels of like per capita income, enormously above what you would expect of a society of their, development level. And they did it not using the free market policies that you claim are the central basis for all social and material development. So there are a lot of ways that a country can become super duper wealthy and very, very materially productive.
Well, and a man can get wealthy by kidnapping your children. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that he's using free market or it's a moral thing to do, or they're using. And his
I never said
wealth
this was
relies
moral.
upon
We're just
you
talking
having
about
the
what
money
builds
to
wealth.
ransom your children. So yeah,
I mean,
I'm
I
gonna
never
say
said it
that
was
Saudi
moral.
Arabia is
We're
not a
just
free
talking
market
about what
country.
builds wealth. You're the one who's making the claim that wealth is built fundamentally, or at least the huge spike in wealth since the Industrial Revolution has been built by the existence of liberal economics and the free market. And I'm saying that's just ahistorical. It doesn't correlate to the developments of dozens of countries across the world. It's not the explanatory variable.
So when I say, just for instance, so when I say that free markets require a respect for property rights, you somehow bring in Saudi Arabia with its massive theft of Western technology,
Which got
and
really
expertise
wealthy,
and
yes.
companies, you somehow bring that into the free market and its respect for property rights.
No, I said they don't have a free market, and in spite of that, they have grown very civilizationally wealthy. They're a counter argument to your point.
No, they're not.
Okay, so you just admitted that they are not, advocates of the free market, so to speak, and yet, if I could Google right now, Saudi Arabia economic stats, I think we would find that in spite of that deficiency, they have propelled themselves to a pretty impressive position. And I would argue that is, of course, because of the tireless work of their incredibly exploited worker base, who is, essentially, at the behest of a totalitarian theocracy, but they are nonetheless workers, and they are the ones that produce the wealth. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's where the wealth comes from.
All right. Let's see here. Sorry, just we've gone far afield from my original, which is good. This is a rambling kind of thing. Yeah, here we go. They depend on oil as the country has the second largest proven petroleum reserves, the largest exporter of petroleum in the world. Did they develop all of that technology and knowledge and expertise themselves, do you think, Vaush, or did they get it from somewhere else?
I don't see how that's in any way relevant to my claim that you don't need free market economics to build a high level of civilizational wealth. Stealing is, after all, a way civilizations build wealth.
I guess I'll have to connect the dots for you then.
I mean, how do you? Oh, wait. How do you think?
You into the cave
how do you
of
think?
knowledge? All right.
How do you think England got to be such a
just
global
finish, because,
civilization? They stole wealth from
I wanna make
countries
this
all over
point,
the
all right?
place.
So, if you don't invent something yourself, but you're dependent upon the free market to invent it for you, then you kind of are dependent on the free market for the source of your wealth.
That would
In other
only be
words,
the case
Saudi
if
Arabia
only the
did
free
not- hang on,
market
let me
could
finish
build
my
oil
point,
tech.
and then I'll be quiet. Let me finish my point. So, if Saudi Arabia didn't develop all of this oil extraction technology, the petroleum engineering, all of the wonderful machinery and complexity and all of that, if they instead stole it from free market developed economies, then they kind of are dependent on the free market for the source of their wealth.
So let me clarify two things. For one, I addressed this argument earlier, where you cannot simply hand wave the enormous material success of societies that do not have free markets by saying that they just got what they had from other countries. For two, stealing is a valid way for, not moral, mind you, but a valid way for civilizations to accrue wealth. The British Empire did this for like a millennia. Many of the civilizations that we, laud today, yours, maybe, Canada did some stuff, I'm pretty sure. America, certainly. We stole enormous amounts of wealth from all over the world, and that contributed to our civilizational wealth. Again, I'm not making moral claims here, only factual ones. And finally, the fact that Saudi Arabia nationalized the industries within its borders, and that is how they seized control of, so to speak, the means of production, albeit for the royal family, is not an argument that they couldn't have developed those facilities themselves. In every case, this is a legitimate example of, without the impetus of the free market, a society managing to develop enormous material wealth. Also, the idea that just because they nationalized a few oil fields 45 years ago, therefore means that all the wealth they've enjoyed since then is exclusively because of the refineries that they only would have been able to steal and couldn't have just built themselves, I think is fairly ridiculous. I don't think it's a good explanatory, variable for why they're so wealthy.
So if I might just ask like a question here, again, I want to be mostly out of this, but it seems like a better way to phrase this would be whether or not a free market is better at this kind of innovation. Vaush, do you think it's just
hang on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
Go
just before we put a bookmark on that, because I do want to get back to this communist argument that we all know this one, like there's a fixed pie in the world, and if one country ends up with more slices of pie, it's because it stole slices of pie from other countries.
Right.
And of course, there is theft. And I am a voluntarist. I'm an anarchist. I despise and dislike the existence of the state in any way, shape, or form as a predatory mechanism which violates property and personhood on a regular basis, both domestically and overseas, in horrifying, complex, and multi-millennial manners. But come on, the wealth of the West was not primarily stolen. And we know this because the wealth in the West is far more than the entire GDP. What on earth is that background noise? The wealth of the West is far greater than the entire GDP of the world 200 years ago. So there's no conceivable way that the West could have stolen all of that wealth. And of course, the reality is that as far as roaming bands of gangs stealing things from each other, that's been a constant for 150,000 years of human history. So the idea, again, we go back to this thing at the beginning where human income was flat, human wealth was flat for almost all of human history, and then you get this incredible spike over the last 200 years. That's not the result of people just being better at stealing. That is the result of the free market, because theft has been a constant factor in human society throughout all of human history.
Okay. So for one,
that background noise, just by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of
Oh,
distracting.
I apologize. I was typing down a few of the points to make sure I didn't forget any. I'm taking your advice. I'm a millennial. I can't write with my hand. Okay, so there are a couple things here. I have no idea what communism has to do with believing there's one pie and different civilizations have different slices of the pie. It's pretty well known economically and politically that it is not a zero-sum game, that different parties can benefit. I don't know why you're arguing as though I said that stealing is an explanatory factor for civilizational wealth. I'm only saying it is a way that civilizations have built upon their wealth. And your idea that the great civilizations of the West today didn't build a tremendous amount of their wealth off of theft is frankly ridiculous. Colonialism fueled the American, the English, the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Spanish empires for an incredibly long length of time. I mean, if we could go over, I don't have these stats in front of me right now, but if we could go over them, they are the amount of wealth that they were able to pull in, raw materials, labor exploitation from their colonies was unbelievable. And critiquing colonialism is by no means a communist exclusive venture. But yeah, no, just stealing is a thing civilizations do. Again, it's a counter argument to your point that the free market and the magic of individual success is the explanatory factor for the huge increase in civilizational wealth. Also, I can't help but notice, it seems like every time I get you on something, you jump to a different topic. Like before we were on like the Saudi Arabia, North and South Korea, and now you jump to the idea that like communists are saying the wealth only got their money from stealing, which I never said. So just it's very spurious.
No, this is not me jumping around, brother. Come on, don't be ridiculous. It's not me jumping around at all. You brought up this argument that the West in part gained its wealth through colonialism, and I'm just pushing back. This is not true.
That is a factually correct statement.
Colonialism, like most government programs, it was a government program. Colonialism was brutal on the working classes of Europe. I mean, you probably know these stories as well as I do. Colonialism was a map coloring exercise for the ruling classes. It did not make the countries wealthier at all. It benefited certain particular individuals who were very high up. It's like the Federal Reserve of its time, like this money printing machine of monstrosity benefits a few people at the top at the expense of the working class. But the idea that the society as a whole became wealthier during colonial times is, well, you can see particular people became richer, those who got the kind of anti-free trade monopolies and charters from the government. Yeah, they got kind of rich, and that was a violation of free trade and property and all of that. But the average person, taxpayers lost money on colonialism. The taxes would have been far lower without colonialism, and they lost their lives, their freedoms, their futures, everything with colonialism. It was a monstrous behavior on the part of the state. And so the idea that this suddenly generated a massive amount of wealth, and the argument against that, of course, is that if colonialism was so profitable, then why on earth did all the European powers, after they had exhausted themselves to near decrepitude after the First and Second World War, why was the first thing they did was give up all their colonies?
All right.
I mean, if it's so wonderfully productive and profitable to have colonies, why didn't they just use that to replenish their coffers? Because they lost money on those things.
So I would expect somebody who wrote a book called The Art of the Argument to understand what an unsound argument is. So first of all, That colonialism was hard on European people has literally nothing to do with any point that I was making. I'm sure colonialism was difficult for European people in a number of ways. It went on for centuries. I'm sure it introduced a lot of strange economic pressures that were quite hard on the peasantry of the countries that were doing the colonializing. Second of all, it was by no means just a state's endeavor. Most colonialism took place under a system called mercantile capitalism, which means trade firms would work alongside the crown to colonize different countries. This is where we get stuff like the East India Trading Company. This is where we get stuff like all of the trade, like everything that happened in India.
What I just said.
Right, exactly. So this wasn't a state project. This was in large part pre-capitalism corporations working alongside state mandates to towards a specific collective economic end. Third of all,
so it was run by the state, but it wasn't a government program.
No, it wasn't run by the state. The state. Whoa! My friend, your ears. Get the eggs out of them. I said that they worked alongside the state, not that it was a state project.
Nobody works alongside the state. Come on. I mean, the state is the monopoly of force. It's the one with all the guns and cannons and bullets. I mean, nobody works alongside the state.
If you would like to go over, no, it's okay. I can't do a full history lesson right now. But if you want to go over it, you can find that there were actually very wealthy people who, of their own independent volition, chose to start firms to work alongside the crown without any guns being pressed to their head. It's called mercantile capitalism. It's not just a state project. This is highly ahistorical. What's more, your argument that colonialism didn't benefit society at large, it just benefited the wealthy, that's the case for all societies. Every civilization that has ever existed, with the possible exception of some incredibly small anarchist communes, has had a wildly disproportionate amount of wealth and material productivity directed towards the ruling class of that society. That was the case in Rome, that was the case in Greece, that was the case in medieval Europe, and that is the case in large part today. The fact that it disproportionately benefits the wealthy doesn't mean it doesn't also benefit society. Again, England, Portugal, Spain, these countries.
The guy who
why are you so allergic to letting me finish a point?
Thrown on a ship and then not given any oranges or lemons, who developed scurvy, had his
this
teeth
is
fall
not
out, his
related.
eyesight go,
I
and
just
then got
acknowledged
before he
that
even got a chance to
individual
go into
peasants
combat was somehow benefiting from colonialism.
No, that isn't an argument that I made. My friend, the eggs. You have to listen, okay? I'm not saying that every individual peasant benefited from colonialism. I am saying the civilization at large did. This is factually correct if you take a look at all of the spices, material, wealth, and labor that these colonizers were able to extract from the colonized civilizations.
But
they
why
built.
wouldn't they?
Whoa! Please, my friend, you made 4 points. I give you 4 points back. So this idea that it's disproportionate in how it's distributed, irrelevant to the broader argument. And last but not least, the idea that, like, well, if colonialism was so profitable, why didn't they just keep doing it? There are a number of historical and social arguments as to why individual colonies, most of them fought or revolted against their colonial oppressors. Nowadays, we have an international environment that discourages colonialism, thank goodness. But in large part, the reason why England didn't just, stay in charge of India is because they were growing so feisty that it wouldn't have been worth the effort. So there you go. Colonialism was beneficial to the civilizations that colonized in general. That's why they did it after all. It was hard on the individual peasants of that civilization, but that's the case for everything that has ever taken place in these civilizations. That it was disproportionately beneficial to the wealthy is irrelevant, and the fact that it ended isn't an argument against its efficacy during the time when it was functioning.
So real quick,
oh my God. You're taking
Stefan,
the side of the ruling class to own the free market guy.
By saying colonialism was effective?
Hang on. You
Are
had
you
your
that
say, man.
weak
You had
for
your
a
say.
gotcha?
Back the fuck off the mic.
Come on,
you had
guys.
your say, all right?
Real quick, Stefan.
I guess I'm going to have to be the one who
Stefan?
stands up for the working class here. Because the fact that a couple of people really well connected to the guys with all the guns, the state, the fact that the oligarchs in the mercantilist, capitalist model, the fact that they were able to bribe the state to socialize the costs of their monopoly enforcement of the extraction of resources from foreign countries, which is what mercantilism is. The fact that they were able to socialize the cost of that by having the government steal people's lives, steal people's labor, and enforce people into the Navy and into the Army and so on. The fact that they were able to do that is not beneficial to society as a whole. There is no such thing, of course, as society as a whole. I mean, this is just a concept, right? So the fact that the vast majority of people in the colonial powers paid more taxes, was subject to more arbitrary kidnappings and being forced to be the Army and Navy slaves of the mercantilist powers that be, the idea that this is somehow beneficial to society as a whole is monstrous.
So,
The
so
fact that
I should
oligarchs
clarify, and
use
we
the
can
power of the
we can
state
put a
to
lid on
enslave
this.
the working classes is not beneficial to society.
We can
as
put
a
a
whole.
we can put a
I
lid
gotta
on
tell
this.
you, I was a
So
little surprised hearing this.
Yeah, I
this
want to
defense of
clarify.
oligarchical, mercantilist.
I want
violence
to
from
clarify this
economists.
really
It's kind of
quickly.
surprising.
So I've said this several times. I'm not making any moral statements, only factual statements. And the argument is what builds civilizational wealth, over which colonialism objectively did. That's why they did it. So this weird, like, virtue signally, like, 2-minute rant about how I dare I speak over the poor, plighted European commoner. I'm not saying any of this was moral. It's colonialism. Do you think I'm defending colonialism? What are you listening to this discussion? No, I'm saying it contributed to the accumulation of material wealth. This is what Marx would have called, by the way, primitive accumulation. You can Google that next time you'd like to come more prepared to a discussion of this caliber. But yeah, in the future, please listen to my arguments before responding to them. Maud, you've been interrupted so many times. I apologize for the indignities that have been forced upon you.